The opinions expressed on the following sponsored program are strictly those of the host, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors. Welcome to the CareGiver reality show with your hosts, David Levy and Paul Vadiato, who bring you more than a combined 25 years of practical experience, helping thousands of family caregivers, helping them find solutions to the challenges and frustrations presented by this important responsibility. So if you are in the position of caring for a spouse or a parent, a loved one who is no longer able to care for themselves, or if you know someone who is, this hour will be worth the listening. Now, let's tune in to today's edition of CareGiver Reality with your hosts, David Levy and Paul Vadiato.
Well, good evening, South Florida, America, and the world. It's another Tuesday, and it's another CareGiver Reality Hour. You're listening to us you're watching either on CareGiverReality.com, live show, AMP Squared TV. You're listening on iHeartRadio or right here in South Florida on WWNN 1470 AM. We've got a very special guest coming in just a little while, and if you got any questions or you want to talk to us, 1-888-565-1470. First, good evening, Paul.
Good evening, David, and good evening to all of our listeners. Welcome back.
Thank you. Anyway, I just wanted, before we get started, to extend condolences on behalf of the show, Paul and myself. Barry Sinrod, who's been on and was on a couple of weeks ago, and he was the gentleman, if you recall, that tried so hard to find somebody to help him with assisted suicide for his wife, who had progressive and very disabling and dementia. From Parkinson's, and she did finally pass last week, and I just want to extend our condolences and tell him how much we're relieved that he can finally seek a little peace and that she has got the peace that she deserves. I was talking to him the other night because he's up in New York with his family.
What do you have to say?
Well, one of the things is he felt like a very lost puppy, and I reminded him that his intense role of caregiving and his seeking, trying to find, through hospice, through all kinds of organizations, the relief that he was looking for her. He lost his job. And I said, overnight, you got fired. And I said, so there's a loss from the intensity of what you're doing. There is obviously the grieving now for the finality of the fact that it has happened, and trying now, even though it's way too fresh, to figure out who is Barry going forward. And I said, don't try and do too much thinking about it, because I said grieving is a process, and you have to go through it. You can't go around it. And so it will come at its own chosen speed. I don't care how strong you are mentally and physically. If you sublimate it or push it down, it's still going to pop back up, and so you might as well go along for the ride, because you're going to need to go through grieving.
The loss hurts.
Oh, of course it hurts.
No matter what the circumstances. We say that it was a blessing at the time, but my sympathy goes out to Barry and his family.
Right. And I was looking to see, and our guest tonight, when he shows up, is Scott Solkoff, one of the eminent elder law attorneys here in Florida, and for that matter across the country. And I was looking at something today called POLST, and what it is, it's Physician's Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment, and it's a little bit different than what we typically talk about as an advance directive or a healthcare advance directive, in that you have the advance directive in your hand, you bring it in. Sometimes people will stick it in the file at the hospital or wherever they may be. But this is a direct physician order, and it's on a pink sheet of paper. And if you're capable at that time and the doctor and you agree as to what you want, you still can't get euthanasia. But it certainly spells out very, very clearly what it is that you will and will not expect from the doctor. And different from an advance directive is this is actually part of the clinical medical file and must be observed. I had heard on TV or read somewhere in the last week or so, there was a lawsuit that was won by a family that we had a situation like this in Florida a couple of years ago, but he had a POLST, P-O-L-S-T, order in his file, and they resuscitated him. And the family held the medical team accountable, not EMTs. This was actually in the hospital where they knew it was in the file. And it wasn't even a question of malpractice. It was a question of failure to observe the written order. And it actually could be, in the sense, battery and abuse. And it may not fall under your malpractice insurance and may very well require you to go hire a criminal attorney to defend you for actually doing something that was contraindicated. You would never do it for anything else that was in the medical record. Why would one turn down the do not resuscitate? And this is going to be more and more of an issue in an aging society as we grow forward.
David, is this written at the time of admission? Is this written beforehand? How do you get that into the record, and who do you need to speak to get that done?
You need to speak to your doctor or the surgeon or whoever else is putting you into the facility, even if it's a nursing home. But see, this is different. It's not just an advance directive. It's a physician's order.
Yes.
So it carries a different level of weight in that it is right there for everybody on the clinical team to see, and not something that a surrogate may come in with afterwards. Now, the advantage is it's very contemporary to what's going on. However, one has to realize that if you come in a greatly debilitated state or with dementia or unable to communicate, one can't really put this in place. But if you are going and having, let's say, surgery for what potentially is, stage 4 cancer or something along those lines,
right,
and you want to make absolutely clear that you do not want anything else done, that you're willing to go through the procedure, or for that matter, you may not want the procedure at all. And so you may have been admitted for, let's say, palliative care, and not yet from hospice, but you're just there to be, let's say, reevaluated, etc. And they may decide that, all right, now maybe we can treat this. And you say, absolutely no. It's a medical order and not just an advance directive request.
Two questions for you, David. First, for our audience, would you define palliative care? And the second question, since our listening audience is all over the world, is this something unique to Florida, or does this exist elsewhere?
Well, I'm going to ask Scott that.
Okay.
This was handed, where I read it, it was part of a function going on for the Coalition for Compassionate Care in California. I've also seen a similar thing for Oregon and Washington State. I'm going to ask, I would imagine that one could almost in any state sit down with their doctor and have this be a part of the clinical record. I don't know what the formalities beyond stating your request are from either a statutory perspective or a practical perspective. So I'm going to ask that question when he gets here. As far as palliative is a form of care that is really designed to keep the patient pain-free, comfortable, with as much dignity as possible. It's not necessarily only end-of-life hospice, although hospice is renowned for doing what we would call palliative care. And one of the things, and I think we touched on this last week, it doesn't stop you from having whatever procedures or treatment that you're going through. But if the treatment is at a level where, let's say, OxyContin or some of the other standard painkillers don't work, but you still want to try and see if the therapy can't work, but it requires higher levels of other things, then palliative care may be the way, because hospice is renowned, as are other palliative care physicians, in the use of morphine and other really powerful painkillers, but that still may allow the coordination of productive health care to go on, but without all of the uncomfortable side effects, if they can do that.
This whole question is becoming more and more complex, and I imagine with the aging population, it's going to become more and more frequent that these bioethical questions are going to need to be addressed between law, medicine, and the individual family.
Exactly. And you know, I was doing a support group today at Arden, and one of the questions that came up was, what do you do if you can't afford assisted living, you don't have a long-term care insurance policy, and you can't keep it up doing it at home? And you know, I said, you're really pretty limited, and if you can't do it under the roof, other than kind of qualifying for Medicaid and then putting a loved one in a nursing home, which may not be the same kind of an environment, and it isn't, that a good memory care assisted living is, which tries to motivate the resident to do as much as they can, to participate in activities, to try and, whether it's art therapy, music. One woman there has had her husband in for the last 3 months, and when he first came in, he was doing nothing. Now he sings, he participates in art class.
Great.
And they are getting him to the point where he's doing as much as he can do, which, even though she had round-the-clock help at home, could not provide the level of stimulation and activity that a facility specifically addressing the needs of those with dementia can do.
You know, we speak the words quality of life. There's a prime example of what that translates out to when a situation is as serious as it is in the case that you just described. That person with the music and the art is better for it than not having it by being in his own home.
Exactly. And it's a combination not only of quality of life, but it also respects the human being from a dignity perspective, because even though they may not have the cognitive ability to communicate or put things in an executive function or an orderly fashion, their eyes, their ears, their senses still work. There is a person underneath there, and that's something that even folks in the medical profession forget. When you don't have somebody that can communicate with you or no longer has cognitive capability, you kind of tend to dismiss them and view them as a hollow individual, when there's really a person there that does have a brain dysfunction, but they're very much a human being. And I think sometimes we forget that, and that's a very important element with anybody that has a cognitive dysfunction, is not to forget that there's somebody in there, even if you can't rationalize with them, even if you're fighting with the disease, even if their behavior is not the way we remembered it or would want it. There still is somebody in there.
And that's at any age, young or old.
Sure. When you have a child with severe autism or some, birth defect that may inhibit their communications or their ability to do things, there's still a person there. And that person,
no question.
And that person needs to be recognized for who they are and the fact that they are here as a human being. And Paul, how was your week?
Actually, it was an improving week. Debbie is having the best couple of days that she's had in a while. But I mentioned last week she had gone for some trigger point shots, and they seem to be really helping. But I do want to share something that I thought was such great advice from her doctor who manages the pain. And we've had a personal relationship with the doctor as she worked at a facility where he was. And he looked at her and he said, "Debbie," he says, "you're going to have to come to grips that your life has changed. And rather than fight it, You take the days that you're feeling better and you do as much as you can with them, and don't dwell upon what you don't have anymore. I thought that was so to the point.
You know, on my ride over here, I gave a phone call to a woman that's been in my support groups for a long time, was also would co-present with me under certain circumstances, and her name is Rivian Marcus, and she always lets me use her name. And one of the things, because her husband is in the VA facility down in Pembroke Pines, and they're giving him wonderful care for dementia. But that wasn't the reason that I say this, is she wrote a little book, A to Z, and she said on living life. And she said every day she goes through it. And she said, today I was back to the A. And I said, okay, I know what it was, but tell me again. And she said, accept your reality. And in keeping with exactly what the doctor said, we all have to remember that. You know, there are things we want, there are things we wish we could change, that it was different, that we didn't have this or that hadn't happened. But I think the only way we can have peace inside of ourselves is to accept the reality of where we are, who we are, and what we can do. It's not a question of keeping up with the Joneses. It's accepting how you keep up with yourself.
And, you know, as the caregiver and the advocate, our job is really to support that point of view, that premise.
Oh, absolutely.
We're the anchor. We're the point of center in making that happen. And sometimes it's hard and it's challenging, but it's a very important role that we play as a caregiver.
Right. And I'll tell you, this week I had to rethink, and I was very pleased that she said it, accepting reality. You and I got together yesterday, and you said to me, gee, you look lousy. Now, you don't usually see me in my green shorts and a floppy T-shirt, but the point was, I was having a tough day getting centered on a lot of things. It wasn't so much that Suzette was having a bad day. I was having a bad day because things weren't happening fast enough. I didn't like the way certain other things were going on. No different than anybody else, no different than any of our listeners go through. And when Rivian said today, accept your reality, those were words well spoken. And I think tomorrow morning and tonight and going forward, I think accept your reality is, I'm going to have a pendant around my neck that says that. Anyway, folks, you're listening to us on the Caregiver Reality Hour. You can see us on caregiverreality.com, live show, AMP Squared TV, that's AMP2.TV, iHeartRadio, and we're coming to you live, WWNN 1470 AM in beautiful but rainy Boca Raton. And if you want to speak to us, 1-888-565-1470. And I think we'll go to a break, and when we come back, I have a couple interesting things that I want to bring to your attention. And Scott, if you're out there driving, you got 15 minutes or we're cutting you off. All right, so let's go to a break.
Thank you.
Are you a family caregiver? Are you taking care of a spouse or loved one who can no longer take care of himself or herself? Are you dealing with Alzheimer's disease and don't know what to do? Do you feel burned out, frustrated, and just don't know where to turn? You've tried doctors, lawyers, and mental health professionals and have come to realize that they don't have practical answers to these questions. What you need are experts, non-clinical family caregivers with 25 years of active experience helping thousands of family caregivers like yourself. People who can help you provide a better quality of life for yourself and your loved one. Who you need are David Levy or Paul Vadiato. Reach David at david@caregiverreality.com or reach Paul at caregiverreality.com and let them help you pick the right path towards improving the quality of life for you, the caregiver, and your loved one. CFC support helps fund research. You can too. Each year, thousands of men and women serving their country in the U.S. military, as well as other employees of the federal government and the U.S. Postal Service, provide support for medical research to find treatments and cures for diseases. This is done through the Combined Federal Campaign, an annual workplace giving campaign that allows eligible individuals to support charities, such as those that conduct medical research, through a payroll deduction. Money donated this way to the medical research charities and its member organizations helps fund research to fight diseases from Alzheimer's to cancer, multiple sclerosis, blindness, breathing disorders, and much more. The diseases included afflict people of all ages, from the very young to the very old. You don't need to be a member of the military or a federal government employee to support research to help you or those you love that are suffering from an illness or disease. Donations to our not-for-profit tax-exempt organizations are tax-deductible and provide a vital source of funding in the fight to defeat some of life's most dreaded diseases. Please visit the website of the Medical Research Charities, which can be found at medicalresearchcharities.org. That's all one word, medicalresearchcharities.org. On that website, you can learn more about our member charities and make a donation in support of the research they're conducting for a specific disease or family of diseases. You can make a donation to Medical Research Charities itself and support the work of all our member charities. Please visit our website today, medicalresearchcharities.org. Become a part of joining forces to find a cure.
My name is Paul, and I am a spousal caregiver. I am one of 50 million caregivers just here in the United States alone. I keep my wife safe. I help maintain her dignity. I help give her the best quality of life possible, and above all, I am her advocate. Yes, there are times that I get angry. I become frustrated with the system. Sometimes I feel resentment and I deal with guilt, and I know that I am not alone. When I need support, I turn to CareGiver Reality for help. My name is Paul Vadiato, and I am president of CareGiver Reality. Find us at www.caregiverreality.com. Help is a click away.
This is CareGiver Reality with gerontologist David Levy and caregiver expert Paul Vadiato, who ask you to call in and speak with him on the air toll-free at 888-565-1470. That's 888-565-1470 to share a story or important information. Now, back to today's CareGiver Reality Show.
And we're back, and you're listening to the Caregiver Reality Hour, and you just heard Paul do his commercial, and he was very good at it, and he says when he has a problem, he calls Caregiver Reality. No, he doesn't talk to himself in the closet. He gets a hold of me or Brenda or some of the others, and he discusses it. He never thought about that when he was doing the commercial, that he calls himself. But, that happens when you have early dementia, but we're not telling Paul. We're keeping it a secret a while longer so that he can still play president. But, no, it's a great commercial, and he's very sincere. And he used that line when he was out at a meeting in Texas a month ago.
Recovery Center, Origins.
At Origins, and which is an addiction center
for
rehabilitation, and he was there with all the clinical people, and he stood up just like a good 12-stepper and said, "My name is Paul, I'm a caregiver." And they all turned around and looked at him, and then when he said, "And how many of you are caregivers?" He found at least 30% of the audience that he was speaking with were caregivers, and we find that constantly when we do it at an elder law class at Nova. We ask that question. 25% of the class, even though they're young, are doing caregiving. Caregiving has no age. It's a role that you get put into. And so young, old, who you're caring for, the relationship really doesn't mean, or the disease really doesn't mean a lot in the overall scheme of things in being a caregiver. You're a caregiver because either you chose to be or you were picked. Or even if you weren't picked, tag, you're it. And that happens a lot. You just don't have a choice in the matter.
I think you coined a great phrase yesterday when we were talking. Caregiving is agnostic.
Right. Now you're going to have to explain agnostic.
Well, it matters not what the disease is. It matters not who the person is. Caregiving is caregiving across the board, and everyone who's a caregiver is going to face the same challenges, at times have the same feelings, at times have the same frustrations as everyone else. And once we learn how to better cope and better problem solve, we're on our way to becoming better caregivers.
Yes, and agnostic means basically that there's nothing unique about any of the ingredients in caregiving, or age, finances, etc. You might think that if you had a lot of money you could buy your way through the problem. Now Paul is extremely wealthy and still has the same issues that I do, all right, and I don't have anywhere near the kind of money that he does. He's been really good over the years in putting it away, and so I don't care, rich or poor, no matter what's going on, caregiving is very unique. And when I was talking to the support group today, I said over and over again, it's complex, it's complicated, it's confusing, and it's counterintuitive, meaning just when you think you understand what's about to happen, it goes in the other direction. It flips upside down. And it's almost something that you can plan on in caregiving, that whatever you planned on isn't going to happen that way, because there's just a million forks in the road, and all you can do is the best job that you can at the time, making sure that you have hopefully gathered as much information about what's going on and what your options are, because having a clear understanding of your options, even if they're lousy, at least allows you to make the best decision you could make under the circumstances, but more importantly, have the peace of mind that you did the best you could with what you had, and move on from there. And with that goes one other thing. There ain't no such thing as perfect in caregiving. There are no perfect caregivers. Florence Nightingale and Mother Teresa have not amalgamated in anybody that I have met so far who has to be a caregiver.
And we are our worst enemies in setting that bar.
Oh gosh, we set it so high that we just feel that whatever we did wasn't enough. And until you've really been in the trenches with caregiving and you realize that what you do that gets you and your loved one through the day is more than enough, and that if you can't make them calmer, make them smile, make them change their behavior, well, you can't, all right? Accept your reality as a caregiver. And I think that's very important. You heard at the break, Medical Research Charities, which is an organization, as I say every week, that we're affiliated with. We try and give them additional caregiver support for all of their underlying organizations. Last week we talked about the gene and vaccine therapy in Florida being done up in Port St. Lucie, and how they had now we're collaborating with the Karolinska Institute in Sweden to do more investigation about aspects of aging and how we can do better and healthier aging. This week, because it happens to be that time of the year, one of their constituent agencies, or partners rather, is the Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America. It's the premier patient organization dedicated to improving the quality of life for people with asthma and allergies through education, advocacy, and research. It was founded a long time ago, back in 1953, so it's almost 60 years old. But they serve more than 60 million Americans with asthma and allergic diseases. It helps provide research grants, and in conjunction with the National Institute of Health, helps to find causes, cures, and better treatment of asthma and allergies. And AAFA, which is their initials, is a trusted information source for parents, families, and caregivers to access about information, asthma and allergy, and many of the programs support the needs of children and their caregivers. I know because my grandkids, two of the many, have very bad allergies, and it can be very perplexing. And I know plenty of caregivers that we work with that have asthma. And, down here this year, in the heat and the rain, A lot of stuff grows and pollinates, so allergies and asthma are something that can exacerbate it. And just this past weekend, we had here in South Florida a bad fire in the west part of Broward. Part of the Everglades caught on fire due to a lightning blast. And so, similar to like Los Angeles, we had a lot of smoke and smog and ash, and there were a lot of people with respiratory problems, asthma and allergies, as well as COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, that had very, very difficult time this weekend, and that was one of the reasons why. Paul?
And if anyone would like to contribute, medical research charities .org is the place that you can, and whatever you feel is appropriate would be much appreciated.
Right, and you can give to them as the umbrella organization, or you can just scan down their page and pick the disease or affliction that may be affecting someone in your family or that you feel strongly about, and you can make a directed contribution to that research organization for that particular disease or illness.
David, wanted to spend a few minutes and talk a little bit about autism. There recently was a study, as you know, that was just completed by the Autism Speaks organization, and it was published in the Journal of
the American Medical Association.
Yeah, the American Medical Association, Pediatrics. And I want to just read a little bit of what their findings were, and then talk about something that's happening locally, if I may.
Sure.
Autism extracts a very heavy toll on families across the country, but in trying to ascertain the financial costs, it became a little bit more difficult. Well, that's what this study attempted to do, was to quantify what those costs actually were. We have a price tag. The lifetime cost of supporting a person with autism ranges from $1.4 million to $2.4 million in the United States, depending upon whether the person also has an intellectual disability. As for children with autism, the study says that more workplace policies that are friendly to parents of children with disabilities such as autism would mean fewer parents would drop out of the workforce.
And when they drop out of the workforce, or rather, when they stay in the workforce, I think there was an additional comment. What it costs the employer in terms of their productivity?
Amazing. It's over $18.7 $1,000 a year, $18,700. That's an amazing number.
Right, and when you even if you're making $75,000, and I'm not saying that everybody out there is, I know I'm not, but to say that almost a little less than 30%, 25% is the productivity loss because you're preoccupied at work with worrying about your kid with autism and all the other things that are needed. Those extract a tremendous toll. And you and I both know, with the incredible growth of autism, and not that we understand exactly why, but it's occurring in, what is it, 1 out of every 68 kids? I mean, that's a huge number. And to see the kind of losses in the workplace and the millions, and we're talking about what it costs above and beyond what it would normally take you to raise a child, but the continuation of having to do that beyond when they normally would have grown up, gone to college, and flown out of the nest and been on their own. We're talking about costs related to having to keep them at home, not allow them necessarily to become as independent as we might like, and as you said, if there are intellectual problems, that further exacerbates the circumstances. So $1.4 million to $2.4 million in today's dollars is an incredible amount of money.
And only to grow.
And only to grow. Now, I know that you've been dealing with an autism organization, and tomorrow we're supposed to...
Yes. Very excited. In Broward County, tomorrow is the grand opening of the Florida Comprehensive Autism Center. And they are located at 2701 West Oakland Park Boulevard in Fort Lauderdale. And they are going to be having an open house tomorrow night from 6:30 to 8:30. And David and I will be there and get an opportunity to get to see us in person. Also, there is going to be Miss California USA.
Which is far better than Paul and me.
Well, that is true. And she is going to be introducing a national program called Strength for Our Daughters program. And this program provides numerous services for young women coming out of foster care across the United States, and it's tremendous value. So it's open to all. It's a great opportunity to meet these people. I know the director. She's amazing. And if you have an opportunity to be out there from 6:30 to 8:30 tomorrow night in West Fort Lauderdale.
Again, Paul?
2701 West Oakland Park Boulevard in Fort Lauderdale.
All right. Well, that's certainly, and I know a little bit because Paul's been explaining to me, to actually have an autism-focused facility right here in Broward County, I think is a tremendous opportunity for families that are struggling with autism to be able to get the kinds of information, to be able to get involved with programs, and to understand better the disease, the affliction that they are working with their family and their children is a great step forward.
It is. And services are so hard to come by.
Yes, I know because I have a granddaughter who's in that ADHD, whatever they call autism spectrum.
Yes.
And I know how difficult it was to find the right setting, the right educational capability, the right kinds of resources to maximize her ability to grow and mature intellectually and practically as a result of, her particular problem. And so I applaud the efforts. I'm glad we can go down and support them. And I would recommend to anybody out there, if you've got a little bit of time, stop in. I think it'll be well worth your while. And going forward, we'll keep you informed and involved. One of these days, I would like to see the director either sit on in that chair that should be occupied now by Scott Solkoff.
Well, I'll be meeting with her tomorrow, and I'll extend that invitation, because I think in the months to come, as we look at these various illnesses that our caregivers are dealing with, it's a good thing that our listening audience become more familiar with those challenges.
Absolutely. One of the things, as I spend a lot of time on the internet doing research, and one of the great researchers is a gentleman by the name of, he's a PhD, his name is Stephen Zarit, Z-A-R-I-T, and many of you that are clinically oriented know that Stephen Zarit, the Zarit stress level scale, is something that is used quite often to assess, obviously, the stress level in caregivers and others, and it has been around for quite a while, has been fully vetted, and it works. But he was giving a speech the other day, and he was talking about caregivers, and he's extremely knowledgeable. And I just want to read, and it's only maybe 20 words. He said, "Our systems for supporting family caregivers," just what I said, "are complicated, confusing, underfunded, and caregivers often feel frustrated and alone in trying to navigate through various services." And while I said it in a slightly different way, Dr. Zarit has said it, and this was a major speech he was making on behalf of, I think, the NIH. And these are issues that those in the know recognize, that what's out there for the caregiver is difficult to find. And remember, as a family caregiver, as an unpaid family caregiver, you're tasked with the responsibility of not only maintaining your loved one's lifestyle to the degree that you can, supporting them in their illness to the degree that you have to be involved directly in their illness, and also to try and understand the system. What is out there Why is it so frustrating? Why can't my doctor give me better advice? Why can't he steer me towards what I always hear about, community-based resources? How come when I go to look on the internet, there's a million things, but when I really am looking for things that are accurate, the only thing I ever hear about is the Medicare Navigator, or how to find and evaluate by the STAR system a nursing home. And while there's all kinds of resources on the internet, what you have to be very careful about is to understand who's dispensing the information and what's the other agenda. I think that many of the organizations that are out there that put out information for caregivers mean well. But when you open up the site, and before you can even get past page 1, you are assaulted with all kinds of pop-ups, all kinds of advertising for drugs, for facilities, and I recognize everybody has to make a living. But even before you've told them anything about what they might need to know, they're being challenged to step into the next, click here, and we'll find you this, we'll find you that, send us your information, and, we have a great service for you, et cetera, et cetera. But sometimes you have to take a step back and say, because things are so counterintuitive and because skill sets in this world are not what we would hope they would be, before you buy, you have to understand how to buy. You can buy a car because you've been exposed to it. Do you understand how to purchase for yourself and others an assisted living facility? How do you pick a nursing home? How do you know what to go in and ask for? One of the big things that when people go into facilities and they see a nice shiny front, it looks good, and hopefully when you walk in the door these days it smells good. But one of the things that you have to do besides talking to the marketing director or the administrator is to go back and ask the folks that are working there, how long have you been there? Because if you start hearing, I've been here 3 months, 6 months from too many people, then the turnover is such that you have to begin to question what's going on. Why can't they keep the people that are there? Is it a financial reason they're not paying enough? Is it that they're understaffed and these folks are overworked? Or is there other reasons? And that should alert you. It's like when you go and sit down in a restaurant and the first thing you're served is, or you order and the waitress doesn't look clean, and she's, what do you want? And I'm being, very critical here. And then somebody drops a plate in front of you and the food looks half cooked. You're ready to leave because there's nothing that you need to know further about a restaurant that's serving bad food that has lousy service. But when you're entrusting your loved one or your family or yourself individually to use the kind of resources that are out there, you need to understand what it is that you need to know. One of the things that Caregiver Reality and the CaregiverReality.com website is loaded with the practical information that you need to make real decisions that are going to deeply affect what you do and how your family and others will react to decisions that you make in the role of caregiver. And so I say to everyone out there who's listening, it is so important that you arm yourself with as much information as possible before you go and make serious decisions. And some of those decisions have to do with medical treatment. Many people have the same group of doctors that they've had for years and years, and I take nothing away from the medical profession, and they may have them because they're great. But what happens many times are those doctors, you walk in, Sam, how are you? Molly, how are you? Anything new? Anything different? Time for the refill on your prescription. And they don't look at you the same way that somebody that doesn't know you. And one of the things that I try and do, I know you're in the process of doing it, I am too. Suzette went to a brand new general practitioner so that we could get a set of fresh eyes. He has called for all of her records from all of the doctors that have been treating her for the past couple of years, and he wants to evaluate for himself what still makes real good sense, what doesn't, in light of her condition and other things. And he makes it very clear. He doesn't know a lot about dysautonomia. Very few people do. He said, but I know what I see that makes good sense and good medicine. And that's what I want. I want somebody to be looking at those prescriptions. I want somebody to be looking at some of the advice and how we're approaching things with her disease and her illness. It's not because I don't think the people that are doing it aren't doing a great job. I think they are. But I'm too close to the situation, and I need to be able to have somebody come in and say, this is what's going on, here's my evaluation, accept it for the trust you put in me, and make your adjustments, if needed, accordingly.
And we recognize, David, that we are very blessed in this area, that we have so many centers of excellence, so many specialists that are out there for which to choose. But in other parts of the country and in more rural areas, they may not have the same kind of choices. And sometimes, as that advocate for our loved ones, we're going to have to travel to find that center of excellence that's going to be able to look at the whole patient and to make the determination what is the best way to proceed.
You know, a long time ago in this business, and when I first met you, you know, our approach to evaluating a caregiver in their circumstances were that you'd be in the room, I'd be in the room, maybe an elder law attorney,
Yes.
and others, and it was what we used to call the Mayo Clinic, all smart heads in the room, listening to what the client, patient, whoever, whatever identification it was in relationship to the professionals that were there, each hearing what the client had to say through their own ears and their specialization, and not necessarily a rehash, so that when we got all through and we had an opportunity afterwards to sit down, and I'd look at you and say, all right, what did you hear? And if it was an elder law attorney, or if we had a medical specialist, what did you hear? The financial guy, what did you hear? And it gave us an overview, all right, that didn't have to be flavored with, did we take good notes? All right, did we repeat? Or did the individual specialist get the answers to questions that they were allowed to ask that you and I may not have brought up on behalf of another one of those professionals, even though we may have been around them a long time? Still, each set of circumstances is different, and the opportunity to have smart heads in the room. And that's one of the things as they try and figure out how to create out of the medical profession the medical home model, you know, that starts from the hospital or the clinical component of having all the doctors be there. Have somebody who is skilled in pharmacology sitting on top of what they're all prescribing and asking, do we need this? Do we need this now? Do we need it in these doses? And to have the questions answered rather than have every specialist go off and treat the patient for their unique specialty, which is what we want, but never really have the opportunity to collaborate with everybody else and compare and contrast what's going on to see if it maximizes what is good for the patient, besides what's good for the specialist inside of their specialty.
And in most cases, they do not talk to one another.
No, and that's the unfortunate thing. And even though we have now going on, the electronic medical record that everybody talks about, the EMR. Doctors each take notes and listen for certain things and write it up a certain way. And one of the things, just like any other technical specialist professional, you have ways of doing things, and maybe the next specialist doesn't do it quite the same way. Maybe certain terms of art, shall we say, how they describe things, vary between the professions and may mean one thing to one specialist and something else to another. And so without the ability to kind of eyeball one another, and I realize in this day and age that's very tough, but as we get closer and closer to bundling care, where the hospital, facility, whatever it may be, is going to get X amount of dollars for a procedure or an illness or an ailment, and all of the people involved are going to, all the doctors and clinicians and everybody else that's involved, they're going to be part of that bundle. And they're going to have to collaborate with one another because they're all getting paid out of one pot that's not just fee for service any longer. It's a single fee that has to be apportioned amongst all. And it will be based upon the collaborative, collective contribution that each has. And it's going to change the way medicine works. It's also going to change the way home care works. And what we're going to do once we bring home a loved one quicker and sicker, because unfortunately that's what's happening because of the lack of facilities being able to keep people longer because of either bundled care or Medicare restrictions or whatever the issues may be.
David, last week, that Debbie had gone for a CAT scan, and she was having some pulmonary issues. And when we left the imaging center where she had the CAT scan done, they gave us a piece of paper which was the radiologist's report and also the actual disc of the pictures that were taken. And when we went to the pulmonologist, and I had the two in my hand, she said to us, I want to see the disc because I don't want my judgment to be colored by or changed by what was written on the sheet. I want to see it with my eyes and then read that afterwards. So, it is not an exact science.
No.
There is a lot of room for people to interpret.
And that's what I was going to say. It's highly interpretive. And, we only have a little bit more time here. It's amazing how time flies. But one of the things that we're going to be raising, and those of you who are driving home today or listening, that are still in the workplace, we are very, very serious about trying to recognize further the issues of caregiving in the workplace. And just flex time or being able to work a little bit from home, etc., without recognizing the dilemma of the caregiver. No different than what you just read from Autism Speaks that was in the Journal of the American Medical Association, that the loss in productivity for a mom, and we'll use a mom in this case, for her worrying about and not focused on the work that she's supposed to be doing as part of her job, $18,000. So, go ahead and divide that by a $40 or $50 an hour worker, and that's pretty damn high.
And then multiply that by the 50 million caregivers that are out there.
Right, but more importantly, as we look, this is young caregiving.
Yes.
So anybody that thinks that, our segment that's been determined by all of the work that Freddie does and who's listening and who's watching, we're 44 to 65. We're square on boomers and early, Gen Xers that are moving into this area. We're 60-40 women to men, which certainly doesn't surprise us. But we have to remember that there are just as many people under that age. We tend to kind of make caregiving more in the realm of elder care, but it's not. It's everybody care. It's the fact that people get sick at any age, are born with things, have things happen to them, and we have to be more cognizant in the workplace of being more caregiver friendly, because the more that we look at caregivers as folks that aren't 100% dedicated because they have other things going on, the more those caregivers are going to hide in the workplace, not raise their head, not raise their hand. And the services that are available today do not really meet the measure of what caregivers truly need in terms of the ability to speak what's on their mind, to be able to have support groups at lunchtime. But the fear is, if my boss sees me, what am I going to do? I can't afford to lose this job. I can't afford to lose my promotion. So those of you that are driving home tonight and listening and recognizing that you're in the workplace, I guarantee you that if you're not a caregiver, you know some folks that are, and you know the difficulty of trying to maintain your job and also maintain your role as caregiver. And many of you that are driving home are bosses, owners, and management, and in an aging population. And when we have childhood diseases to the extent that we do with autism, you as an employer need to understand the immense cost of trying to stay hidden in your workplace, and the immense amount of money that you could be putting back on the bottom line simply by recognizing and offering them better quality of services. And that's something that Caregiver Reality is very strong about. I've been very big, and you have too, Paul, on what we call presenteeism, hiding in the, going to work, but trying to do your work and also get your other job done in the role of caregiver.
Plus, being a caregiver-friendly employer helps retain those important employees. It becomes
it recruits and it retains.
Yes, it brings the best talent in there.
And it keeps them.
And it keeps them there.
And especially as we see that more and more people want to remain in the workplace, where before we used to retire at a much younger age, now people either want to or need to continue to work. These are your knowledge workers. These are the people you spent a lot of money in teaching them what it is that makes your business run. Now, we only have a few minutes left. We actually have 1 minute, so as always at this time, I want to thank everybody for listening to the Caregiver Reality Hour and South Florida, America, and the world. We're here to support you. We believe in the caregiver. Thank you for listening. Paul?
Thank you so much for listening. Caregivers, have a good week and take care of yourself. Good night.
And accept your reality.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Reality Show. Each week, David Levy, a gerontologist, and Paul Vadiato, a caregiver expert with a combined over 25 years of experience, providing practical and realistic help to caregivers struggling to keep up with the needs of a loved one who are unable to care for himself or herself. To reach David Levy, email him at david@caregiverreality.com, or to reach Paul Vadiato, email paul@caregiverreality.com. And find out more online. Just go to caregiverreality.com. See you next week for another exciting show of Caregiver Reality. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management,